Hi, it's Karen with Sacred Quilt, and I'm getting ready to do a demo for one of my guilds for paper piecing. So I thought I would share with you what paper piecing actually looks like. I chose a pattern from Wombat Quilts. They're free, and this one's called Star Petal. And it's going to look, each block will look like this when it's done. So when I'm finished, I could put them all together if I make 4, or I could border them and use it in a quilt, whatever I want to do with it. I like the idea of using this small one because it already looks like a flower. And if the people in the class decide they don't like paper piecing or they're one and done, they could always turn this into a mug rug. So the first way I start is by looking at my pattern pieces. It's my pattern. I write on it. If you print it out, it's your pattern. You can write on it. And I just try and measure. If you look at the number 2 piece, which is a triangle, I like about a 1/2 to 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. And that way I'm sure the fabric I'm cutting will cover the piece that I'm trying to cover. So if I do this and put my mark at the 1/2 inch line, then you could see all around. If I add another 1/2 inch, it's going to be 3 inches, and it's just under 3 inches. But if you just want to make it 3 inches square, that's fine, and that will work to cover your piece. And then I do that for each piece. I can also write on the pattern which, the leaves are green, or I write my color code in if I need to. And then I pre-cut and I label everything. I love these little sticky notes, and that way I'm good to go. I don't like using scraps for this because the worst thing in paper piecing is if you sew it and the stitches are very tiny in paper piecing, and then you have to reverse sew it because your fabric piece doesn't cover the pattern piece that you need it to. So let's get started. Okay, I'm at my sewing machine. We're ready to get started. It's a little glary. I'm sorry. I do use the light for a reason, and seeing through your paper piece is very useful. And if you're doing this at midnight, an OttLite is a great tool to have. So my first piece is pinned on, and what I want to show you is that it faces away from the pattern. Here's the printed side, and then here's the side with the fabric on it. So that's piece number 1. Now I'm going to take piece number 2, which is that triangle we looked at earlier. So number 2, I'm going to line up the seam allowance pretty much along with the first piece, and we'll see how that works out. So if you look at it through the light, it's lined up on the back, and your first stitch line is between piece number 1 and piece number 2. I do have my machine set on a smaller stitch. On this, it's about 1.5, and I'll show you how that looks when I'm done. And then when I made the first 2, I put the second one in, but I'm just using a tail for this one. And I do that so I don't have to keep starting and stopping with my threads. I do that when I sew all the time. So here's piece number 1. And now when you look through with the light behind it, you could see piece number 2 is covered fully. And I will take the pin out and then press it. And then you want to trim your seam allowance. I don't think we even need to do that yet. It's not very much on this one. So 1 and 2 are already sewn, and now we're going to number 3, which is this bigger triangle. So I'm going to take piece number 3 in my flower color, and I'm going to line this one up against the other 2 for this particular one. So now you can't see 1 or 2, it's underneath. And from this side, you could see how much it's overlapping in. And if you ever want to double check yourself, you can fold along that seam line between on the edge of number 3 and see that the piece is covered completely on the back side of it. And I also want you to see that I have looked at this side. I stitched first between 1 and 2, and now I just stitched between that and number 3 along the 3 seam allowance, 3 seam line. And it's covered more than, I have a lot, I'll end up trimming a lot off of this one underneath, but that's okay. It's covered, which saves me a lot of time in the long run. There's a reason why I have all these seam rippers over here. So when I don't have to seam rip, it saves me time. And I have my iron right next to me. So here's the right side out. The fabric faces away from the printed side. And it's the right side of the fabric that's facing away from the printed side of the paper. Takes a little while to get used to that. All right, so I did number 3. I'm up to piece number 4, which is another triangle in the corner. And for this block, I cut 4 and 5 the same. So my key seam line here is between 3 and 4. And so I'm lining it up. Nope, see, I'm wrong. Gets confusing. You have to think about it. You just want your seam allowance when you look at it from the wrong side. It's your seam allowance that you're double checking. And we gave ourselves such a generous seam allowance that we should be fine. So I see the quarter, trying to see if you can see through that. The quarter is here for my number 4 seam allowance. And when I sew it, it will flip up and cover piece number 4. And then I'm going to go back and trim all the extra fabric underneath to cut down on the bulk. Okay, good. Now I'm going to press number 4 into place along the stitch line I just sewed. But you see underneath number 4, I have a lot of extra fabric. So that's what I'm going to trim away. Today, we're just using scissors. Other people have used rotary cutters and their rulers. This is just as easy. So there you have number 4, if you look at it that way. And I could, at this point, also trim a lot of this extra so it doesn't get caught as I move on to sew. So number 4. Good. And what comes after 4? 5. I'm back in the other corner. So this number 5 piece happens to be under piece number 2. And so that's the seam that I'm focusing on right now, is this one. Okay, so you want the seam allowance to show under, just make sure you could see this, under the number 5 piece. So it's just under here. I see it just underneath. And then I'm going to sew that. Okay. Number 5 is sewn on. Again, a lot of extra fabric underneath. Let's cut down on the bulk. So I trim all that seam allowance, which is actually from piece number 2. And then if I want to trim it a little less because it's white over a red seam allowance, I can. That way I'm sure that there's no show through on the correct side. Just a little more. Okay. Press. So I'm up to piece number 5. All the right sides are facing outward. I'm going to trim this extra off. And then I move on to 6 and 7. So the seam here for number 6 is between 4 and 3. So this is my stitch line along number 6. Okay, I'm holding it up so I could see my, nope, that's number 7, number 6. What also made this easier is some of my pieces are batiks, so then it doesn't really matter which side goes which way. All right, so here's piece number 6, and here's the number 6 seam allowance, and I'm going to sew it. Okay, 6 is sewn right here. So I have some extra fabric I can trim. Press it. Looking from the back, which is the side we look at to sew on. I have some extra over here I'm trimming off. And then number 7. And let's see this, number 7. Oops, see, I got myself confused again. Number 7, the seam allowance. This is an extra big piece because it was the end of the piece of fabric, but my 7 seam allowance is over here. I'm going to sew along that line. All right, so number 7 is sewn on there. I'm going to trim off the seam allowance where I can. There. Okay, I've given it one final press, and you can see where it needs to be trimmed. So I look at this side. And there it is. It's not so hard. You can see you have to take your time. You have to think it through. Even if you've done this for years and years like I have, it's still easy to make mistakes. And I just love it because it's so very accurate. Thanks for watching today. I hope that offered some help if you're a new paper piecer, and I hope you'll give it a try. It's a great process to use. And don't forget, you can pick up a copy of my book, The UFO Cure, on sacredquilt.com. If you like the channel, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Bye.